On November 24th, in 1989, in the quiet area of Acme, Washington, Mandy Stavik was brutally assaulted, murdered, and left in the Nooksack River. Nearly 30 years later, her killer would finally be identified and brought to justice. Hey everyone, my name is Lauren Elizabeth, and welcome to my channel. Here I talk about true crime, missing people, and unsolved mysteries. If you like that type of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. Today we are talking about the case of Mandy Stavik, who in 1989 was a young and bright college student. She would be 49 years old if she were with us today, but unfortunately her life was brutally ended when she was only 18 years old. Mandy Stavik was born on April 16th of 1971 to parents Glenn and Mary Stavik. The family lived in Anchorage, Alaska. Glenn and Mary Stavik had a total of 4 children together: Brent, Molly, Mandy, and Lee. When Mandy was a toddler in 1974, her parents got divorced, and her father, Glenn Stavik, would later get remarried. The following year, in 1975, tragedy would strike the Stavik family for the first time, when Mandy's older brother, 17-year-old Brent Stavik, was shot and killed while he was out hunting. Brent's death was definitely not a hunting accident. He was found with over 20 shots in his back and his head. Unfortunately, no killer or even a potential motive has ever been identified. In 1983, when Mandy was in 7th grade, Mary decided that her and her children needed to change, and the family moved from Anchorage, Alaska to Acme, Washington. Acme is a beautiful rural subsection of Whatcom County, and only has a population of a few hundred people. Acme was like your classic rural idyllic town, where everybody seemed to know everybody, and there was a general sense that nothing bad could ever happen there. Mary and her 3 children, Molly, Mandy, and Lee, were settling into the new area and enjoying a quiet, peaceful, rural life in Acme. 6 years later, in 1989, Mandy Stavik had grown into a bright and beautiful young woman. She was energetic, happy, and outgoing, and was well liked by everybody who knew her. She had a lot of friends, including a boyfriend named Rick Zender, and after having graduated from high school, Mandy was now a first-year student studying at Central Washington University. November 24th of 1989 was the day after Thanksgiving, and Mandy Stavik was home to celebrate the holidays with her family. At around 2:30 p.m., Mandy decided she wanted to go out for a run, as she often did. Mandy was very athletic and liked to stay healthy and active. She ran track, she played softball, and even volunteered as a lifeguard, and going out for a run was something that Mandy frequently did. When Mandy was home in Acme, she would usually go running along with her mother Mary and their dog Kyra. On this particular day, though, Mary's sister, or Mandy's aunt, was also at the Stavik home visiting for the holidays, so Mary decided that she would stay at home to chat with her sister, and Mandy and Kyra went alone. So at around 2:30 p.m. on November 24th, Mandy and the German Shepherd Kyra would set off for a run. Mary didn't know it at the time, of course, but that would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Mandy had a usual route that she would always take when she went out for a run. She'd go down the street from the Stavik home and then turn onto Strand Road and run along Strand Road, which came to a dead end at the South Fork of the Nooksack River. After reaching the end of Strand Road, Mandy would turn around and come back the way she had came. But on this day, she didn't make it back. Instead, the family dog Kyra came back to the Stavik residence alone, seeming shaken and stressed. Mandy's family instantly knew something was wrong when Kyra came home without her. Mary immediately called Mandy's boyfriend, Rick Zender, as well as a few of her closest friends, and none of them had seen her or talked to her. And so the police were called, and Mandy was reported as missing, and a search began. Mandy's brother Lee was over at a friend's house at this time, and this friend's house was on Strand Road along Mandy's usual route. Lee said that he and his friend had seen Mandy and Kyra running along the road toward the Stavik home, meaning Mandy had already made it through most of her route and was already on the way back toward the Stavik home. The search would last for 3 days, and on November 27th, Mandy's body was found. Her body was found in the South Fork of the Nooksack River, found by a search boat from the local fire department. She was naked except for a pair of socks and a pair of running shoes. Her body was found face down in the shallow water at the river's edge. Her body was tangled in branches and debris that was also floating in the river and prevented her body from floating any further downstream. The autopsy found that Mandy Stavik had been sexually assaulted and that she died from asphyxia due to drowning. There was a 2-by-3-inch injury to the top of her head, and there was bleeding under the scalp. Mandy's arms and legs were also covered in small scratches, which were thought to have come from blackberry bushes, of which there were a lot in the area. It was obvious that somebody had killed her, but what was less obvious was who exactly had killed her. This was a tiny rural community, an area that gave everybody the sense that nothing could ever go wrong, and Mandy Stavik was such a lively and bright and sweet young girl, and nobody could fathom who would possibly want to hurt her. In addition to Mandy's younger brother Lee, there were other witnesses who had seen Mandy and Kyra running along Strand Road. A man named Dave Cracker, who was working as a delivery man at that time, said that he had seen Mandy run by his delivery van in the direction of the Stavik home. When asked if he had seen anybody nearby, Dave said he saw a young man, and he also saw a truck drive by with 2 people inside of it. Another woman who lived on Strand Road said that she and her husband had seen a station wagon drive by just before they had seen Mandy run by their house. I'm a little unclear about the man that Dave Cracker said he saw. I'm not sure if this man was allegedly on foot or in a vehicle, but from what I can tell, I believe it's thought that he was the same man that the other lady saw in the station wagon. I'm also unsure if they ever identified or spoke with the people that Dave Cracker allegedly saw drive by in a truck, and it's also worth noting that Dave Cracker is the only witness reported to have seen this truck drive by. A police sketch was made, however, of the other man that was thought to have been seen at the time, and this sketch was released to the public. Police believe that whoever attacked Mandy likely pushed or shoved Kyra into a ditch before taking off with Mandy. They also believe it's likely that the assailant had been traveling in a car and they had grabbed Mandy due to the fact that Mandy was a very fast and strong runner, and it's thought that she would have likely been able to escape anyone attacking her on foot. It's thought that the assailant may have dragged her into a vehicle where the assault ended up taking place. Authorities also think it's likely that Mandy had tried to escape, and that's when the assailant had hit her over the head, likely knocking her unconscious. The scratches on her arms and legs were thought to have been caused by bushes in the area, and it's thought likely that either she got these while running from her assailant, or after the assailant had knocked her unconscious and dragged her down to the Nooksack River. Police interviewed all of Mandy's family and friends, and nobody had any idea who could want to do this to Mandy. Police, of course, had a very close look at Mandy's boyfriend, Rick Zender, who was nothing but helpful and cooperative the whole time, and he was quickly ruled out as a potential suspect. Police were able to retrieve DNA evidence from Mandy's body, and 30 local men were swabbed, but unfortunately a match wasn't found with any of them. In 1989, DNA technology wasn't nearly what it is today, and a lot of these DNA databases that authorities used weren't as widely used, and they didn't have a large number of people entered into them, so it was less likely to be able to find a match. The hunt for Mandy Stavik's killer continued, but with no new information or new leads coming in, the case eventually went cold. Fast forward to the summer of 2013. It had been 23 years since Mandy Stavik was killed, and her case had long since gone cold. On a hot day in June, 2 women, Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson, were spending the day at Birch Bay Water Park with their children. While they were each watching their children play, Heather and Marilee began chatting with each other. They didn't know each other very well, but they had both grown up in Acme, Washington, and of course, everybody from Acme knew about Mandy Stavik and what had happened to her. Both Heather and Marilee were somewhat close to Mandy in age, although not quite close enough that they would have been hanging out in school. Heather was 3 years younger than Mandy, and I believe Marilee was a few years older. As the 2 women sat and chatted about the hometown cold case and how tragic it was that it had never been solved, something suddenly clicked into place. Both women were remembering experiences they had had back in Acme, experiences with one particular man. Heather Backstrom recalled a time in 1989, just a few months before Heather's murder. She had been riding in a truck coming home from a house party. In the truck with her was a friend of hers named Dan, and another man named Tim Bass, who was driving the truck. Heather was around 15 years old at this time, and Tim Bass was 21 years old. Tim was apparently generally creepy to Heather during this ride, commenting constantly on her eyes and her figure, and at some point during the drive he grabbed a pen from the truck's cup holder and began to slowly rub it along Heather's knee. Heather said that she felt safe, or at least safe-ish, because of her other friend in the truck. She felt that Tim wouldn't have tried anything else. However, she did make it a point to never be anywhere close to Tim Bass ever again after that time. And Marilee Anderson had a story about the same man. Marilee said that a few years after Mandy's murder, Tim Bass, who was an acquaintance of her husband, had stopped by her house one night, saying that he had been out hunting and asked if he could use her phone. Marilee agreed and let him in, and Tim Bass went over to the phone and dialed a number which seemingly did not answer the call. But Marilee had heard the dial tone when Tim was on the phone, indicating that he had never even dialed a number in the first place and was just pretending to use the phone. At this point, Marilee began feeling a little uneasy as she didn't know Tim too well, and pretending to use the phone was weird, and her husband was not home at this time. Tim then came into the living room and professed his love for Marilee and began requesting that she have sex with him, to which Marilee firmly refused. This conversation apparently repeated itself a few times, with Tim Bass trying to convince Marilee to sleep with him, and her repeatedly refusing. Eventually, she was able to get him out of the house under threat of her calling the police. After this incident, Marilee had not had any further contact with Tim Bass. I'm assuming she'd also probably mentioned what happened to her husband, and the two of them did not want anything to do with Tim Bass. Now, in 2013, as Heather and Marilee were hearing each other's stories about the same man, they started thinking, what if Tim had been creepy to other women? What if he had been creepy to Mandy? And what if it had gotten out of hand and gotten a lot worse than simply being creepy? Neither Heather or Marilee had ever considered or thought about Tim Bass having been involved in Mandy's murder, but after they heard each other's stories, they kind of started thinking that maybe he could be. With their newfound hunch, Heather and Marilee contacted detectives in Acme and let them know about their suspicions of Tim Bass. From what I can tell, it seems that Tim Bass had not previously been looked into in the Mandy Stavik case. However, now that authorities had his name, they looked into it. They found that Tim was now working as a delivery driver for a bakery in Everson, which was about 19 miles north of Acme. When authorities arrived at Tim Bass's house to ask him a few questions about the Mandy Stavik case, he claimed to not recognize the name whatsoever. Tim Bass acted as if he had no idea what they were talking about, and to authorities, this seemed like a really big red flag. Everybody else from the area certainly could not ever forget about the Mandy Stavik case. And Tim Bass had actually lived just down the street from Mandy Stavik. And his younger brother Tom had been a friend of Mandy's. So how could it possibly be that he didn't even remember the name, let alone what had happened to her? Authorities, now considering Tim Bass a suspect, or at least a person of interest, went to the bakery where he was currently working. They were hoping to be able to get access to his delivery truck to find any DNA evidence or any other kind of evidence that they might find in there. Unfortunately, authorities were not able to gain access to Tim's work truck. Kim Wagner was the manager at the bakery where Tim worked. When authorities initially came in, Kim had directed them immediately to the HR department, who told them that they were unable to search any of the workers' trucks without a warrant. And of course, the police were not able to get a warrant because they did not have sufficient evidence to substantiate that. Kim Wagner hadn't known which of the employees the authorities were looking to investigate. And after the authorities were unable to get a warrant, Kim had kind of forgotten about it and didn't think much of it. Until years later, when Kim would be having a conversation with some friends at a bar, when suddenly the Mandy Stavik case would be brought up. And one of her coworkers mentioned to her, "Hey, did you know your coworker Tim Bass used to live near Mandy Stavik?" And Kim suddenly thought back to the police that had been at the bakery a few years before, and she wondered to herself, is that why they were there? Were they investigating Tim Bass for the Mandy Stavik case? Eventually, the authorities would stop by the bakery once again. This time, they were hoping to be able to gain access to Tim's delivery route. Kim pulled authorities aside and asked them if they were investigating the Mandy Stavik case. Wanting to help bring the Stavik family closure and bring Mandy's killer to justice, Kim offered to help the police in any way she could. However, the authorities told her they could not officially enlist a civilian to help them in any sort of investigation. But Kim thought, well, that doesn't stop me from acting on my own. It was then that Kim Wagner noticed a few strange things about Tim Bass, such as the fact he would always wear rubber gloves during his delivery route for the bakery, and the fact that he would often take home all of the garbage from his lunch. However, while Tim did seem to be purposely avoiding leaving any DNA, he did eventually slip up, allowing Kim Wagner to grab a Coke can and a plastic cup, both of which contained Tim's DNA.
And so one morning he came in and he filled up the thing and he drank it, and then he turned around and he threw it away, and he walked past me in the doorway and went into the men's bathroom. And I just stood there and went, oh, it's game time. And I grabbed the cup out, tossed it in my thing, and then another cup got placed in the garbage so he wouldn't come back and go, ah. They had like a safety meeting, so they had a spread of food on the counter, and he was drinking a Coke. So I go, oh, you're drinking a Coke today. And I wanted to remember that, okay, a Coke, and I was like, okay, this just happened to me again, like 2 days later. I'm like, this is jackpot. And so this time my heart was like, oh, I was dying because there was a lot of people around. So I thought, well, it's now or never, because it could take me another 3 months. So I grabbed it, and then I was like, I threw it in my desk drawer.
So from what I can tell, it doesn't seem like Tim Bass was ever looked into originally at the time of Mandy's death, which does seem like a bit of an oversight. Tim Bass was a young man at the time, 21 years old, and lived only a few houses down from Mandy. I know they had looked into and DNA tested 30 local men at the time, but I guess Tim Bass was not one of those men. Tim Bass's DNA was a perfect match for the DNA that had been found on Mandy's body, and in December of 2017, he was arrested for her rape and murder, and it would be another 2 years before trial proceedings began in May of 2019. Mandy's family and friends all took the stand. The prosecution began to illustrate the fact that Tim Bass was someone who Mandy Stavik had barely known. Tim Bass lived a few houses down from Mandy, and Mandy knew his younger brother Tom Bass, but it seems that Mandy and Tim never had any interaction with each other as far as everybody knew. Both of the witnesses that had seen Mandy run by that day were called to the stand to give their testimonies. Jurors were also shown the graphic images that showed Mandy's body as it had been found in the Nooksack River. The jury heard testimony from Ron Peterson, who was the sheriff at Whatcom County Sheriff's Station at the time of Mandy's murder. He talked about how much the case had affected him for the rest of his career and for the rest of his life. Tim Bass's defense was claiming that Tim and Mandy had been having a secret but consensual sexual relationship for some time before Mandy's murder. Tim's defense attorney points to the fact that evidence of sexual contact is not necessarily evidence of rape. The defense team also brought in their own forensic expert, Dr. Elizabeth Johnson. She claimed that the DNA found on Mandy's body could have been there for several days after the sexual contact. However, this claim was directly disputed by Dr. Gary Goldfogel, who was the one who had performed the autopsy on Mandy Stavik's body. Dr. Goldfogel said he believed the DNA had been present for no longer than 12 hours before Mandy's time of death. Dr. Goldfogel also testified to Mandy's cause of death, which had been asphyxia due to drowning. It was noted that there were no combative defense wounds found on Mandy's body, meaning there were no injuries that indicated she had fought back. Her arms and legs were covered in the small scratches that were thought to have been from the blackberry bushes, and there was a significant injury to the top of her head. And while she didn't have any of the combative wounds that she may have had if she fought back, it's also very possible that the assailant knocked her out first, causing the wound to her head, and then she was unconscious and unable to fight back. Next, Tim's ex-wife, Gina Malone, took the stand. She claimed that Tim had been abusive and very manipulative to her all throughout their marriage. When Tim had been initially questioned by police about Mandy Stavik, she had given him an alibi because he told her that she needed to, and she was brainwashed essentially in an abusive relationship, and so she did. But now testifying on the stand, it was her testimony that she did not remember being with Tim Bass on the night Mandy was murdered, and she could not provide him with an alibi. Gina said that Tim would also frequently watch crime shows and very aggressively talk about how stupid the criminals were and how exactly he would have gotten away with it because he was smart enough to get away with a murder. Gina Bass also told the court about a very interesting conversation she remembers taking place between her mother-in-law, Sandra Bass, and Tim Bass back when they were still married. Tim asked his mother if she would claim that her husband, or Tim's dad, had committed the murder of Mandy Stavik. Tim's father had been dead for several years at this point when Tim randomly asked his mother if she would implicate him in Mandy's murder. According to Gina, his mother Sandra refused to claim this. However, contradicting Gina's claim, both Tim and his mother Sandra claimed that this conversation never took place and was an absolute lie. Tim's younger brother, Tom Bass, also took the stand. He testified that his brother Tim had told him randomly in 2015 that he had slept with Mandy Stavik back in 1989. And remember, police had started questioning Tim Bass about Mandy Stavik in around 2013, so I just find it interesting that he never mentioned this to anyone until after the police started poking around. Tom testified that Tim had also asked him if he would claim that he had also slept with Mandy, to which Tom refused and said he was not going to do that. Tom went on to tell the court how his older brother was quite misogynistic and had been that way ever since he got dumped by a girlfriend in high school. Tom said that Tim had never had any respect for women, and that he in fact had quite a hatred for them. And this was of course corroborated by Gina's story that Tim had been abusive all throughout their marriage. All of Mandy's friends and family made it very clear in their testimonies that they did not believe it was possible that Tim and Mandy had been having a secret consensual relationship. No one had ever even known Mandy to even talk to Tim Bass, and Mandy was happily in a relationship with Rick Zender at the time. And according to all of Mandy's friends and family, Tim Bass was not the type of person that Mandy would have been interested in anyway, and wasn't someone that she ever hung around with. There was no evidence to verify that Tim and Mandy had ever been in any sort of secret relationship, and the only person who testified to this was Tim himself. On May 23rd, the jurors began deliberating, and the following day, on May 24th, a verdict had been reached. Before receiving his sentence, Tim Bass spoke to the court one more time.
I would first like to say that I'm 100% innocent of this crime. Furthermore, I don't believe I received a fair trial. In saying that, though, better man in me says I should say very little today. I give this day to the Stavik family. Sir, I would like to address one thing. I love my father. He was my best friend. We did everything together. For my ex-wife, under oath, to get on that stand and say I tried to blame this on him, that is hard to take. I have never been arrested before. I've never been unemployed. I don't do drugs. I don't drink. I've been married for almost, or I was married for almost 30 years. I raised 3 great children, 2 of them on the autism spectrum. I've tried to be respectful and kind in my year and a half that I've been here. It is very hard to do when you're being accused of something like this. I will continue to be this way. This is just the way I am. I wish no ill will towards anyone here, not even today. But I am having a hard time with this. That's all I have to say.
On May 24th of 2019, 29 years after Mandy's murder, her killer was finally brought to justice. Tim Bass was found guilty of Mandy Stavik's kidnap, rape, and murder. He was given the maximum sentence possible, which was 26 years. Tim Bass maintained his claims of innocence and claimed that he had not hurt or killed Mandy Stavik. But in September of 2020, there was allegedly some new evidence brought to light. Tim Bass's defense team claimed that there was a woman who had witnessed a man and a woman who looked like Mandy arguing in a car on the day that Mandy had disappeared. Apparently, this woman had reported this, but she was never contacted by police to follow up on this lead. And it was a former deputy of Whatcom County Sheriff's Office that brought this information to the attention of the defense team. The former deputy, Paul Murphy, had been fired from the force in 2012 after he was allegedly tampering with evidence on his computer. There were also apparent concerns over Paul Murphy's mental health at that time. Tim's defense was now claiming that because this other witness had not been mentioned in the trial, that the trial had not been fair. However, the prosecution said that this information about this witness was, in fact, made available to the defense team as part of a 6,000-page document that outlined all of the available evidence in the case. The credibility of former deputy Paul Murphy was also being called into question, both over mental health concerns and the possibility that he could have been disgruntled toward Whatcom County's Sheriff's Office. Ultimately, it was decided that a new hearing will be held to determine if this evidence is valid and also if this evidence was properly made available to the defense team. As far as I can tell, this hearing has not yet happened, and I haven't found any dates for when it is set to happen. As far as I can tell, this hearing will just be an evidentiary hearing and not an appeal, which basically means that they are just trying to figure out if this new evidence is valid, and I guess if it is ruled as being valid, then Tim Bass will be able to file for an appeal. However, I am not 100% sure on that. Right now, Tim Bass is serving his sentence at the Clallam Bay Correctional Center, and unless he is able to successfully appeal his sentence, his release date is set for 2045. I do personally believe that Tim Bass is guilty of Mandy's murder and that he was rightfully convicted. There's just too much information that points toward him being the killer, and his defense is very weak in my opinion. If he was having an ongoing consensual relationship with Mandy, I find it hard to believe that nobody knew about it. Not any of Tim's friends, not any of Mandy's friends or family. I just find that very hard to believe. And of course, Mandy's family and friends have also all said that they do not believe Mandy would have ever been interested in Tim Bass in the first place. And if Tim Bass was allegedly dating or sleeping with Mandy back in 1989, then why would he suddenly pretend to not remember who she is? If you had a girlfriend or even a casual sexual partner you saw on a semi-regular basis who was brutally murdered, surely that would not be something that would just fade from your memory as the years go by. And of course, Tim was said by multiple people to have been very hateful toward women. And while being a hateful asshole doesn't necessarily make you a murderer, it definitely adds to the reasons I think Tim may have done it. And also, if Tim's story was real and he had just had a consensual relationship with her and then she was murdered by someone else, why was Tim Bass's DNA the only DNA found on her body? There was no DNA from any other killer, no hair, or anything else. It seems very unlikely to me that a killer could assault her, drag her into the river, and not get any of his DNA on her. In my opinion, I believe Tim Bass is guilty, and I am very glad that he was caught, convicted, and I hope he does not ever get an appeal. But it does kind of frustrate me that he only got 26 years, especially after he was living as a free man for nearly 30 years. After he brutally murdered Mandy, He got to have a free life. He got to have his young adult years as a free man. And now he's sentenced to a prison sentence that is shorter than the amount of time he got away with this. It is very upsetting to me, but I also know it is, of course, better late than never, and I am very glad that he's caught and convicted. As I said, there's also set to be another evidentiary hearing, which may end up leading to an appeal trial. I'll keep my eyes out for updates on that and keep you posted if I hear anything. And for today, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you like true crime content and would like to see more from me, please subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time. Stay safe, everybody.